Hello patrons, welcome back to the next part of this tutorial series, and in this part we're going to be working on the nose and all of the white fur around it. So we're going to get all of this blocked in, and then in the last part we're just going to do all of the finishing details and adding the highlights. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to get the nose blocked in. So I've got my reference photo here, and what I'm going to do is, like always, start with the darkest shadows first. So I'm going to get my black Caran d'Ache pencil. You can use any brand of black that you want. And I'm just going to use this to fill in the darkest areas. So the areas that are black in the reference photo. So obviously the nostrils are the darkest area normally of a nose. So those are going to be quite dark. I'm going to shade it in lightly to start with until I've got everything blocked in with the shadows, and then we can go and add even more pressure. So for now I just want to shade in the areas that are dark without using lots and lots of pressure. I'm going in circular motions and overlapping the area to try and fill in all of that white grain, which gives you the impression of it looking darker without having to actually press down hard. There we go. So this area around here is also black. It should be quite easy to do this because you should already have an accurate sketch, and remember the outline sketch is attached. So you can even use the exact same sketch that I used. So this area down here is all quite dark as well. Just gonna put the reference photo in front of me actually. Okay, so yeah, this is all actually quite dark, with the darkest part right in the center. So we'll be layering a bit more onto that area. You also want to take into consideration how it's integrating with the rest of the fur. So it's going to transition a bit softer into the fur. It's not going to be a straight line. So do some little fur marks to help transition the nose into the rest of the fur. You can also shade some of the lighter areas that aren't quite black but are shadowed in. So I'm just going to shade them in as well. I like to jump around and do things as I notice them. So I noticed obviously that we need to shade in this nostril. Really take your time when you do this part. So all of this underside of the nose is quite dark. So I'm just going through and I'm shading in any areas that are more shadowed to give more structure to the nose. So I'm adding more pressure now to do these darker shadowed areas, the more black areas. Okay, so there is more shading up here that we need to do. This part probably does take the most time. Once you've got everything blocked in, it's easier to just go and add all of the other colours on top. Okay, so we've nearly got all of the structures blocked in. Add some more shade in here. Just going to go in circular motions to smooth out the shading down here. Just got to get this bit in now. Okay, so I'm going to leave the black for now. Actually, I might as well just fill in the mouth area as well. I'm going to sharpen it first because it is quite blunt. I probably should have sharpened it earlier. So just getting the shading for the bit of the mouth here, which is all in shadow. So again, I've already sketched out where the mouth should be, so it's quite easy to figure out where I need to put the shadow. Having an accurate sketch really does make your job of colouring easier. So then you can just focus on getting all of the shadows and contrast and colours right. So the sketching process is definitely something that you shouldn't rush through. Also adding in these little markings. Gonna lighten up the grass around it a bit. Okay, so now back to the nose. Back to the nose, and so now I'm gonna go in with the next darkest colour, which will be the French grey. And I'm going to use this for the darker shadows that we haven't filled in yet. So the shadows that are just a bit lighter than the black. And I like using the French grey because it has more of a warm tone to it, more of like a brown tone as well. So it's that grey brown. You can overlap it onto the black as well. Now on these lighter areas there's still little shadows, little markings, so I'm adding in these little markings with this French grey. I'm also going to start to use the sepia 10% with it as well for the highlights. Get the highlights blocked in. So this is lighter than it needs to be, but I'm just adding in these lightest bits first. And then we can darken up areas. Going back in with the French grey, which I'm going to sharpen. So I'm just getting all of the general tones in. We could do all of the little details in a minute. Okay. Now I want to go back in with the black. Just add in the details again. Some of the shadowed little markings. So I want to make sure the nostrils aren't just really sharp. I want to transition into the rest of the nose a bit better. Okay, now I'm going to use the white, pull up some of the markings and create some of these highlights and the texture of the nose. I'm not doing this too hard because I don't want them to be perfectly white. Okay, I might leave the nose for now, just do a few extra highlights. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for now. And so now we're going to work on the fur around the nose. Just want to shade in this area. So first I'm going to go in with the brown ochre, and I want to get in these little brown patches. So I'm just going to shade it in with the brown ochre where the brown patches are. Looking at the direction that they're going in, so like the fur direction still. So just shade in all of the brown areas with the brown ochre. Also adding a little bit of brown to the fur, which seems like it has more of a brown tint. So now I want to go in with the sepia 10%. So even though it's white fur, it still has a lot of greys in it. So bear that in mind when you're choosing your colours, that you shouldn't just be using white. There's lots of different varieties of greys and browns and stuff in this fur. So I'm just going throughout the whole of the photo, whole of the drawing, and just adding in this sepia 10%. We will be adding the darker colours on top, so don't press really hard. This isn't as dark as it's going to go. This is just like a base for those shadows. So I'm adding some sepia 10% up here as well, where it's a bit more shadowed. Transitioning it with the rest of the fur as well, these other darker parts of fur. I'm just going to add some of the darker sepia as well. So I'm adding some of the sepia 50%. Just to really bring out the shadows in this area of the fur. I'm going to go in with a bit of raw umber 10% as well. I'm going to add some of this down here as a base tone. I think this is a great shadowed colour, the raw umbers. I like to use it a lot for skin as well, when I'm drawing people. Swapping over to the sepia 10%. So I'm just getting in all of those base shadows. I'm going to sharpen the sepia 10%. So now I'm going to actually start to work from the top to the bottom and render it as I go. So I'm going to start working on this top area. So the darkest shadow is here. So I'm going to make this shadow more intense at this point. Now using the sepia 10% for the areas that are a bit more shadowed but aren't really dark. Keep looking at the direction the fur's going in. Using more pressure to get in those darkest shadows. So you can see that this fur still looks like it's white, but there's more shadow to it now, which makes it look more three-dimensional. We're also going to add a tiny bit of burnt sienna, just for some of these hairs that are overlapping into the white fur. And I'm going to use a bit of brown ochre. So now I'm going to blend this out with some white to soften the pencil strokes, make them not as harsh. give it a nice soft look. Add in some little loose strands of fur. And I'm finally taking that burnt sienna again, adding some more bits of fur. And also overlapping some of the brown ochre onto the area as well. Okay, so we'll move on from that area for now, and we'll work on this area down here actually. So I'm going to go in with the sepia 50%, and I'm going to use this to block in more of the shadowed areas. So I'm starting from the nose, and I'm looking at the length and the direction that the fur's going in. So you can see that the direction of the fur does change around this area, so keep looking at the reference photo. So I'm trying to break up this solid area by adding little fur strokes. I want it to be more natural, so just break it up a bit. I'll do the same thing on this side as well. I'm just now shading in where the shadow is. So just shading using circular motions just to add tone to that whole area. Again, just shading where the shadows are. So I'm just adding some of the sepia 50% to the shadows around the nose on these brown patches of fur, because there are some darker markings within the patches of fur. Switch back over to the sepia 10%. I'm just using it to shade in where the shadows are. So again, going in with the sepia 50%, just keep layering until you get it how you want. So again, I want to break up this harsh sort of outline. So this might look a bit wiry until you've blended it out. And remember, we're just adding in the shadows. We've got to fill in the rest with some lighter tones and some mid-tones. Just gonna add some more of the sepia 10%. So I can see on the reference photo these really subtle shadows, and that's where I'm shading this. Again, adding a layer of the sepia 10% over everywhere where it's more shadowed. So again, blend in with the sepia 10%. And over here. Okay, so I'm just going through and adding those shadows again. Okay, so even though this looks quite dark, it's this dark in the reference photo, so you might not have thought that you'd be going this dark with white sort of fur, but it's surprising how dark you actually do need to go. So now I'm going to actually go in with a bit of burnt sienna, and I'm going to use this on the brown areas, get them shaded in. So I'm just blocking out the shape of the brown areas again. So now I'm just going to go in with the sepia. I'm going to sharpen it though. So now I'm just going in with the sepia. Add some of the darker fur around the nose. So this is a good colour for those darker markings, darker patches. So I'm just going in and adding those darker areas, these darker, more shadowed areas. We will be adding details with the crafting knife as well throughout all of this area. So keep your pencil sharp, rotate the pencil so that you're always getting a new edge, and this helps keep it sharp. Okay, I'm going to add a bit more of the brown ochre to the brown areas. Just going over with the brown, make it more saturated, circular motions. Going to use more pressure on the shadowed areas. And then go in with the sepia again. Okay. So now I just want to take the French Grey 10%. Just use this to make bits of fur on the lightest areas. We will be blending this and making it look softer. I'm going to go in with the brown ochre 50%. And the burnt sienna. Can I add a bit of French Grey here? So now I'm just going to look at my reference photo again and see if there's any areas that I want to make even darker before I blend it all out. So you can hype up the contrast a bit more than the reference photo. So make things a bit dark and then other areas a bit more highlighted. I'm going to add some more shades into the nose. I'm just adding some shadow there. Shading in the final shadows. I'm going to use a bit of black to break up this edge, this outline, blend it in with the grass. Get that more natural fur look rather than it just being one straight line across. It's got to have a bit of some dips in it. So now I'm going to go in with the white and blend everything out. I'm not using too much pressure. I'm just going to sharpen it there so it's nice and sharp. This just smooths everything out and gets rid of the grainy appearance. So that's definitely an important step. It'll give a softer look to these brown patches of fur as well. And then we can go and add any more details and saturation that we need to them afterwards. So I'm just lightly using the white pencil. I'm still going with the direction of the fur. So I'm focusing on the areas that are a bit grainy. So it already looks a lot better now that it's been pretty much blended out. I'm using a bit more pressure here because it needs to be lightened up a bit as well, rather than just blended. There we go, add a bit more lightness to that, a bit more highlight. Nearly got everything blended out. Now I'm just going to press a bit harder on the areas that need to go a bit lighter. So I'm just using the white pencil with a bit of pressure to create the highlighted strands. Just going to sharpen it a bit. Once the pencils go a bit shorter, I don't use my mechanical pencil because they don't really fit in there once they get really small, so I just use a manual sharpener that I got in one of my drawing sets. So I can really make the most out of the pencil even when they're really, really tiny. Especially because they are so expensive, you want to make sure that you get the most use out of them as possible. Can add some stray hairs as well and flyaway hairs over the top. So I'm just going to go horizontally and soften out this area. It looks a bit wiry at the moment. So I'm just going to soften that all out so it's not so harsh and it's more subtle. Okay, so now we've actually got everything blocked in. It's just about adjusting. So we're going to adjust this area first. Carry on working at that one. Okay, so I'm going to go back in, add some little hairs, especially on this brown patch where the shadows have been lightened up a lot. Adding very detailed fur strokes with a sharp sepia pencil. So I'm just going to sharpen my Faber-Castell black pencil, and I'm going to use that just to create some little details as well. So we want to integrate where the nose goes into the fur a bit more. So I'm just going to create some little black fur strokes to transition these areas a bit better. You can also use it to create some shadowed fur strokes on any of the areas if you want. And filling in the nostrils. So I'm creating really tiny fur strokes just to ease these two areas into each other. Could do that down here as well. So again, just little pencil strokes just to transition this area into the fur. Okay, so I'm going to add some little black fur strokes to this brown patch of fur. So I'm just adding these black fur strokes wherever I want to darken up. With this Polychromos pencil you can get really nice detail. So I'm just adding these shadows everywhere, not just working on this area now. Anywhere that we need to darken up, we're just adding the shadows. So now that everything's in, it's really time to make sure the contrast is right within everything. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to go in with the little crafting knife and I want to use it to lift up some detail here. So I'm just going to start down here and test out the knife in different directions until I find the one that lifts best. Okay, so I'm just going to use it to create some little highlights, some little flyaway bits of fur. So I'm just creating some smaller little details. You can use this to help with this area to soften and create some detailed hair strokes that go over onto the brown fur. That helps make it look more realistic. Same thing over here. You can use it as well on the nose to create the little markings and the little texture. Softening up this area. Okay. Okay, so that's it for that area with adding all of them. Just going to blend that with a bit of primrose. So now it's time to go throughout the whole of the drawing and just work on the contrast. So again, I'm going in with the black polychromos, and I want to fill in all of these dark shadows, especially the ones where I've overlapped lots of fur, so it's lightened up a bit. And I'm just going throughout this with the black polychromos just to make sure that we've got those shadows as dark as they need to be. So I'm looking in my camera at the smaller image of the drawing and seeing the areas that I want to pop more, and then I go and work on them. You can take a photo of your drawing and see what you want to stand out more or adjust. Compare your photo you took of your drawing to the photo of the reference photo and see what looks really different. So I'm just adding all the black down here, up here as well by the eye. And it just helps make the whole drawing pop a bit more. I will be doing this throughout the flowers as well. So I'm adding those dark shadows to the eye and under the eye. Just add some black to this eye as well. Remember to keep pencil sharp when you're doing this part, especially if you need to get in between all the little etched bits of hair. You won't want to cover them up because then you'll lose that detail. So now he's got a lot more contrast going on. The shadows are darker, which is good. He's got some bright areas as well. Okay, so now I just want to work on the flowers a little bit more. So let's just get the contrast on them looking good. We will be adding most of the highlights with the brush and pencil titanium white powder and touch-up texture. That is how we'll be adding most of the highlights. But we still need to get the shadows dark enough. So I'm going to go and add some more shadows to this flower up here. Just crisping up some of those edges. This flower was a bit blurry anyway, so it's okay if it still looks a bit out of focus and doesn't have too much detail going on. So now I'm shading in some of that colour onto this flower up here. This flower is meant to be very blurry and out of focus, so I really want to restrict the detail, but I just wanted to make it a bit more contrasty, add some shadows. I'll blend that out with the white. So now I'm going to add some white bits of fur over the green and on this side. Blend in the edges of the flowers into the fur so it doesn't look so crisp. Also to get rid of any little grainy bits. So another thing that I wanted to do is get a green pencil and just add some bits of grass over the top so they're overlapping onto the actual dog. Some blades of grass. Just a few, it doesn't have to be loads. There we go. Just want to go in with a little bit of the colour Alizarin Crimson. Create some contrast in the flower. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing with the highlights is adding them to like the whiskers. So I'm going to be adding some of that mixture to the whiskers. I'm just going to add a bit of grey to this bit of the whiskers for now, so they're not so bright. I'm going to add in all of the whiskers, all of the highlights, and just add lots of details. So that's what we're going to do in the last part. I'll see you in a minute.